Welcome to the Be That 1% podcast. I'm your host, James Silvis, mindset specialist and performance coach. And here on the show, I'm going to challenge you to think deeper, commit to greatness, and develop a stronger mindset. You'll hear stories from those who are living life on their terms, and you'll receive strategies that will help you level up. So the question is, are you ready to be your own 1%? Let's get started. Welcome back to the Be That 1% podcast. Super grateful that you are here. Thank you for taking the time to listen, whether you're in the gym, in your car, cleaning the house, on your computer, or wherever. Thank you for your time and attention. I don't take that lightly. And if you have heard the last episode on Steve Jobs and kind of my understanding of who he was and some key lessons that I've learned from him, you may remember my goal for 2025 has gotten more specific. As I get older, I get more and more intentional about the years that I welcome in, right? And 2025 for me is going to be different in my research. My wife is pursuing her master's in marriage and family therapy. And so seeing how her curriculum is set up, I'm sure that has had some influence on me in how I structure what I'm going to be researching this year. But for me, in my line of work, working with high-level athletes, national level, world level, and, companies, Fortune 500 companies, executives dealing with lots of responsibility, lots of pressure, quick turnaround times, the ever-expanding landscape of how work is done in multiple different time zones, traveling back and forth, like it can be a lot, right? And as I've been serving these populations, I've noticed that anxiety has been on the rise, not just in who I serve, but also collectively, at least in the United States for sure. And so in an attempt to understand this trend, anxiety was on my list of things to really begin understanding at a deeper level. I think I had a very superficial understanding, and my intention for this year is to really root down into what it is, how it comes about, and what we can do to not let it have the effect of restricting us or crippling us, which what it does for most, and instead leverage that energy, minimize that anxiety, and live more on our terms, right? Not be dictated by what we feel, but more so about what we selectively choose and intentionally show up as. And so anxiety is one. The other is pain. I'll get into that when I do more pain episodes, but I wanted to understand the importance of pain and how naturally human beings shy away from that. We want to stay in our comfort zones, and any sort of mental, physical, emotional pain we tend to avoid. And the benefits of pain and what it does to our nervous system, our minds, and even how it can bring deeper connection to yourself and to others. And so that's what I'll be exploring. And then the third is AI. It's not going away. It's going to be more integrated into the things that we do everyday life, and I want to continue to understand it so that as it shows up more and more, I'm not left behind and I can stay on par at worst, but ahead, obviously, at best. And so as we work into anxiety today, I'm going to share with you my insights from what I've been learning. Now, I am not a professional. I'm not a doctor. This is solely from my own research and my own understanding. And my intention with this is to share what I'm learning, how I'm perceiving it, in an attempt to start the conversation and promote greater understanding, and also challenge myself to be mindful on how I communicate about this anxiety, right? And so as you listen, this is kind of my notes from what I've been reading, understanding, observing in sessions and in my work, and then obviously in the books and podcasts and resources, articles that I've been reading. So today's episode is going to be mainly centered around the book Building a Non-Anxious Life with Dr. John Delony. He's affiliated with Ramsey Solutions, Dave Ramsey, and then also has his own podcast, his own business. I'll kind of explain who he is. He's a 2-time #1 national best-selling author, mental health expert, and host of the Dr. John Delony Show. He has 2 PhDs and over 2 decades of experience in counseling, crisis response, and higher education. So he wrote this book. It was gifted to me synchronistically as I selected anxiety for my research in 2025. And so I got it for Christmas, and then I started reading it and just finished it, mid-January. And some of my notes, I think, would be helpful to give context to what anxiety is. So kind of the buckets here are what is it, maybe some of the connotations that anxiety has currently, how maybe we can view it in a better way, and then some practical things on what we can do to have a better relationship with anxiety. So let's start with the context. If you know of anyone, or you yourself have high levels of anxiety, what I have found through the research and just through also my observations is that there's kind of a few ways that people view anxiety. One, this is according to Dr. Judd Brewer, who is the Director of Research and Innovation at Brown University Mindfulness Center. She shares that people tend to and can romanticize their anxiety, wearing it as like a badge of honor. Like, I'm an anxious person. I care. I show up with this level of energy. They attach it to their identity and they wear it proudly. And then there's another way of dramatize, right? Romanticize, dramatize, where this is the more viewing anxiety like a disease. This is something that I've been, that's something that's going to dramatically change my life. And now I'm crippled. I'm defected. I'm not who I used to be now that I have anxiety, right? And this is very dangerous, slapping any of those labels on you, because labels constrict. Labels all help understand, yes, but they also minimize. And when we minimize ourselves, that doesn't help support us thinking big and being bold and taking on adventure and risk-taking, which are healthy for innovation and experiencing new things and not getting stuck in our old ways, becoming robotic and busy, quote unquote busy, and just going through the motions, which it seems like, there's a high population that does that, right? And so these are kind of the most popular ways to view it. What I also think people don't necessarily spend time thinking about is the positive benefits of anxiety, right? We hear anxiety, we're like, ooh, I don't want that, or oh man, that sucks. And it's like, yes, if it's not in control and it's not looked at in the appropriate ways, but what does anxiety do? Like, what is anxiety, right? If we look at that for a moment, I want to begin with a quote that says, "Anxiety is carrying tomorrow's problems with today's strength." It's worrying about the future in the present, right? Dr. John Delony in the book obviously says anxiety is our body's attempt to tell us that things are out of order. It's an alarm. Anxiety is an alarm sounding off, letting us know that we're one of 4 things, according to John Delony, right? We're unsafe, we're disconnected, unhealthy, or we have little to no say in what happens next, which I interpret that as little to no control, right? So if we kind of separate anxiety into 4 buckets for this conversation: unsafe, disconnected, unhealthy, and no control, little to no control, right? Our alarm goes off and we experience anxiousness. That's where our predictive brain tries to go into the future and try and problem solve for potentialities so that we can be safe, connected, healthy, alive, and more in control, right? When we don't take time to deal with our past, whether we've had trauma or a very significant emotional event that has happened, and that doesn't get dealt with, right? It remains active and it becomes a lens in which we look through our current life through. And that can trigger us when someone does something, or we're in a certain situation, or there's a loud noise, or there's a bright light, or there's something that is reminding us of that past event. Then that trigger goes off, that alarm sounds, our anxiety spikes significantly, fear may enter the picture, and now we feel unsafe because we're reminded of that past moment, right? Or our relationships, or lack thereof, right, can be disruptive, can be toxic, can be not healthy, and can trigger something from the past. And that can lead to the disconnected feeling. Our food, lack of sleep, not exercising can sound the alarm for that unhealthiness. And then our focus on all the things in the future can again zap our energy and our strength and resources for this moment, adding heaviness to this moment, which adds to the little to no control, right? And so this is kind of what's happening moment by moment every day. You know, according to Dr. Wendy Suzuki, NYU professor of neuroscience and psychology, she says that anxiety is sole intent. Its only intent is to keep you safe and alive. That's it. And so by working through these areas, unsafe, disconnected, unhealthy, and little to no control, and we start shoring up those things with a few practicals that we'll get to later in the episode, we can feel more safe. And the more safe we feel, even in uncertainty, the more safe we feel, even amidst potential danger, because of what we've cultivated on the inside our minds, inside our bodies, then we bring more peace, more groundedness, more confidence, more sureness to the inevitable uncertainty that life just is. Robert Sapolsky, he's a Stanford researcher, he says, anxiety is about the dread and foreboding of your imagination running away from you. It's a fantasy of one day. Anxiety calls you to prepare for war. Anxiety narrows our field of vision. Our ability to think rationally goes out the window, and we become obsessed with survival. Now, if you live your life like this, then you are constantly in survival. So your ability to think creatively, your ability to think abstractly, your ability to piece together information from potentially different industries and think in maybe years or decades, to think long term, kind of is stunted by this fear of what is about to happen next, and I have to be ready, right? And we all know that feeling of going through the countless what if scenarios that never end, because one if spawns 10 what ifs, and then those 10 what if, then you're gone, right? This is what anxiety can do. And again, if we look at it from both sides, the quote unquote negative side of it is that it zaps your energy, it keeps you in survival, it ramps up your adrenaline and cortisol levels that ultimately over time wear you down, make you unhealthy and sick and frail, right? But on the positive side, it can prepare you, it can you can leverage the data that comes from being able to view things from many different vantage points, right? And so I'm not necessarily saying that anxiety is all bad. I think we're just way too far on the extreme on one side, that so much so that we get paralyzed by it. And that paralyzation causes procrastination, hesitancy, reclusive kind of behavior where you silo and you kind of go away. You don't want to be a burden. You kind of live off of other people's opinions, right? This type of thing is not living in your truth. So then you just become a tumbleweed blowing in the wind, as opposed to an oak tree standing firm, producing your truth, your fruit for whoever is hungry, quote unquote hungry, or aligns with that food, right? That taste, that truth that you are. And this is kind of like the vibe attracts your tribe type thing. And so that's kind of what I have come to understand of anxiety, and some of the key things that I underlined in the book that really help put context to what is it, right? It's usually in the future, well, almost always in the future. And then it kind of goes to what Dr. John was saying is like, I'm feeling unsafe. Therefore, I have to ramp up my survival instincts to get safe, to fight, or flee. Flight, fight, or flee. Tongue twister. Or that I might be disconnected. I might be abandoned. I might be left alone. I might be rejected. So disconnected. Or my body is unhealthy. It might result in me getting sick or going to the hospital or dying, right? And then little to no control. I have no control, and we crave control and autonomy and freedom as human beings. So to have that feel like it's stripped away or that we don't have any also produces like, I got to do something about it, right? So I hope that helps add clarity to maybe your already existing definition, and also to not become over-identified with it. Because again, that which we become so identified to can end up controlling our life, right? That which we give too much power to ends up controlling us, having power over us. So it's always that healthy balance, one, to acknowledge it, and then also to leverage, understand, you utilize it. And so in the book, there's kind of 6 suggestions that Dr. John Delony kind of goes into. And I won't necessarily go through all of them or all of what he wrote, but it is helpful. I find that if you want to understand anxiety better and have more tools, awareness, strategies, I do think it's a great book to read. Side note, in addition to this book, I'm also reading The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, which goes into how tech and kind of our lifestyle today affects our anxiety levels. Also a great read. And then Feeling Great by David Burns. I got that book from listening to Tom Bilyeu and him saying that was one of the greatest books that he's ever read on anxiety. And that also is a very good book. Strong frameworks, easy to understand, easy to implement, lots of case studies. So there are resources out there. And, if reading is hard to do with time, like, you can always find it in a podcast, YouTube video that has summarizations of these books to get some access to the information. But I'm hoping that today's episode will also build your toolkit. Okay, so the first of the 6 that Dr. John Delony says to work on if we want to have a better relationship to anxiety, not be so addicted to it, and not let it run our lives, is to choose reality. And by this, he means really understanding what grief is. And I liked this definition that he gave, that grief is coming to terms with what you thought would happen or what you think should have happened and what actually happened. The gap between those two. You're going through your life and suddenly someone dies. That is a pattern interrupt. That is, I didn't anticipate that to happen, and it happened. And so now I have to wrestle with what I thought would be and what I think should be versus what is. And that oftentimes people run away from this truth. They're not honest about where they're at, what they want, what's happening in their life. So they kind of live in this delusion of, it hasn't happened, this denial, this conflict avoidant tendency. And so they never confront that truth. And because they never confront it, they always stay in this limbo that naturally brings on more anxiety. So it's like the only way through is through. We got to look at it. We got to be honest with where we are versus where we want to be. This helps us identify that gap between what we desire and the reality in which we are now. And once that gap's identified and dealt with and sat with and understood and looked at and identified, we face that truth. And that is a painful truth. Maybe we're in our 30s and we thought we'd be married. We thought we have more money. We thought our bodies would be in better shape. We thought we'd live in a different city. We thought we'd own more property. We thought we'd fill in the blank, right? At some point, we got to face the truth that that's not what it is. And then we stop running, and then we're able to do something about it. And so in the book, he suggests that you go through these aspects of your life, your relationships, your health, your money, your career, and you basically contrast, like, where am I currently in these things? Am I happy or not in my marriage or in my relationships? Do I have people that I can count on or trust, or do I not? Do I put myself out there, or do I stay at home, right? Healthy. What am I putting in my body? Am I actually doing the things that I say I quote unquote want to do to get fit, or am I just allowing convenience and other things to get in the way? Money. Where am I spending my money? Do I need the things that I spend my money on? Like these types of questions. A career. Have I stayed in the career that I am because I feel like there's no other choice, or because I haven't really spent time looking, or I'm afraid that if I do, I'll lose a good thing and have less, or I'll be rejected by the thing that I really want. You got to acknowledge these things. Self-awareness ultimately helps you move through life with more flexibility and adaptability, as opposed to creating blockages. And those blockages over time just create a lot of internal conflict, which again zaps your energy and your life force. The more we can maneuver that to streamline or to release those knots, massage out those kinks, the better things can flow, right? And so a few prompts that he asks you to think about after you go through each of those areas of life is, what are some areas of your life that are going well? What are some areas of life that you'd like to change? Do you like yourself? Are you proud of yourself and who you're becoming? Do you like how you feel? Do you like how you look? Are you a good spouse, friend, community member, right? The answers to these questions reveal what you're showing up as and what things need to be done. And that creates a roadmap. Once you have a roadmap, there's clarity. Once you have clarity, you have direction. Once you have direction, you have purpose. And then the action you take has meaning, right? So I thought that was, helpful when stopping, kind of the natural tendency to run away, right? We want to face the truth, accept it, want the truth, demand the truth. Otherwise, we'll just continue to live in lies and smoke and mirrors. Number 2, choose connection. So in this chapter, he basically outlines that we are busy. We have so much that we do day in and day out, where we run our lives like dentists, like every 15 minutes, like there's no breaks. We go to the bathroom, we look at our phones. We're driving in our cars, we listen to podcasts. We're on a walk, we're listening to music. Like there's never time where you're connecting with yourself, but maybe even somebody else, right? We can feel alone in a crowded room. And so he shares some research that they conducted with Ramsey Solutions, thousands of Americans, tens of thousands. And in 2022, the research team studied the mental health and relationships and well-being of thousands and thousands of Americans. And here's what they found. 82% of people say that those that they spend the most time with don't know them deeply. They don't know what you're struggling with, your weight, your marriage, your faith. 58% say they have 3 or fewer close friends. 54% of the respondents reported that they don't have a friend they feel comfortable with calling in the middle of the night for an emergency. 47% of married couples admit to struggling with sexual intimacy, and 40% struggle with emotional intimacy with their spouse. These are staggering, guys. These are real things, right? And if we don't feel that we can trust, open up, be vulnerable with people, then we shoulder all of life's burdens. And that just creates more things for us to have to do. Right? And how does being lonely connect to anxiety? Well, here's what Dr. John Delony goes. Our brains are constantly scanning our environment for threats. We've talked about that. That's what our brain is designed to do. It's designed for survival. It's going to constantly look for the things that are either actual threats or perceived threats, right? So our brains are monitoring people, things, or situations. When we're lonely, the body ramps up threat detection. It raises the baseline threat level because it knows one critical fact. You're out here by yourself. So you can't rely on the tribe to spot danger. You have no one else to, in quote unquote, build a fire, gather food, or keep watch. You got to do it all. And when your brain recognizes you're alone, it divides the world into us versus them. Us versus them, because no one's on your side, or minimal people are on your side, right? So it kind of converts into, all right, if there's no one I can trust, then everyone can't be trusted. And so if they can't be trusted, then they become more adversarial, which I thought was really interesting. And so your brain can over-identify people and situations as threatening, because when solving for survival, it's better to assume something is a threat than to be wrong and still be alive, than to ignore something and get killed. It also makes us feel threats that aren't really there, right? So researchers, John Capioppo, Louise Hockley, state that loneliness increases our risk of heart attacks, cardiovascular disease, cancer, addiction, Alzheimer's, depression, personality disorder, suicidal ideation. As a society, we are outsourcing community, connection, and ultimately love for convenience. We're robbing our neighbors and friends of having a purpose of feeling needed or wanting, all because we don't want to burden anyone. We think we got to do it all alone. Or maybe we tried to do it with someone once and we got burned, and so therefore we made an unconscious vow to never do it again. And so we have our barriers and our boundaries so high up that we keep everybody out, right? We're the house on the hill in these ancient. When I was taking my wife to Italy for our honeymoon, we saw these beautiful castles, big walls that keep people out, right? Well, yeah, they keep people out, but they also keep you in. And so, when we're so protected, we actually become imprisoned. And so whether that imprisonment of our thought for protection is coming from hate or coming from past trauma or coming from an idea that no one can be trusted, whatever that line of truth that you keep sharing or that belief that you have that may no longer be true but once helped you, then you begin to let more love in, and love is the way. Love is the magic. Love is the risk. Love is worth it. And so in this chapter, he's really calling us to choose connection, to choose to let people in, to choose to be around people of like mind and equal values. And so, that's a call out to you to go inside and be like, where am I not creating opportunities to establish stronger connection? Tell people how I really feel. Take a risk. Show up. Be vulnerable, right? Otherwise, we're forced to do it all alone, and we can never do it all ourselves. Life's too complex, and and it can be too heavy to do it. So the next is, so we have choose connection. The next is choose freedom. And in this section, he's basically suggesting that a few things. One, it comes down to finances, right? He goes, and he starts off the chapter by saying most people most of the time are living their lives for other people. Naturally, I think human beings are more servant-based, and that can also be taken too far. We'll become so servant-based that we don't have a backbone, and then we just do what everyone wants, and then we lose our own identity in the service of, in not even the service, but more so in the fear of being rejected, not even of service. Because if you're truly in service, it's not even about you anymore. It's bigger than you, right? Whereas the fear of I need you to want me, love me, respect me, all those things, that's still about you. And so he says, when you owe people money, you spend your hours working to pay for things you've already purchased. When you owe people money, you don't get to decide what you do tomorrow. The bank does. Your father-in-law does. Whoever loaned you the money does. And so his call to action here is really just to get better at managing finances so that you're not stuck in situations where you have to do something or feel like you have to do something. And so their research team at Ramsey Solutions conducted some additional research on this, and they found that the average person in America struggles with debt, and over 59% of Americans said that they worry about their general finances. 37% of Americans are either struggling or in crisis when it comes to their money, and just under half, so 45%, said that they have at least $1,000 in savings, while 19% have less than $1,000 in savings, and over 36% have no savings at all. So, there's a lot of reasons for why that may be, and I'm not here to get into those reasons. These are just what the stats are that they found. And so there's a call here to be more financially savvy, learning more about finances, where your money's going, budgeting, quality of work, and how you show up and how you add value to the workplace that maybe brings in more additional revenue or income to the household, things like that. Later on in the chapter, he talks about how choosing freedom correlates with decluttering, that as a culture, we have learned how to amass things, that we've learned the skills of acquiring, but not the skills of removal, of letting things go. We don't really have a psychological construct of enough. I thought that was a really big line, that we have no psychological construct of enough. When is enough enough? I think inherent in the human spirit is an unboundlessness which cannot be contained. And when enough is said, I think the connotation with enough is like there's no more that's needed, right? And I'm not here to say that we should say that, like, be comfortable with enough. It's hard to describe. It's like on one side, you want to be grateful for what you have, right? And I think that that's extremely important. Gratitude is an antidote for anxiety. And I think it's one of the most powerful, overlooked things that people don't do is like gratitude. Gratitude brings you in the moment. Gratitude refocuses you from scarcity to abundance. Gratitude gives you energy. Gratitude provides, helps with grit and mental toughness. Gratitude improves sleep, improves immune system function. Like, it does a lot. And we aren't that very, very good because we're constantly focused on what we don't have, right? And that's just natural to how our brains are wired. We're always going to look for more. And when we're looking for more, we miss what we have, right? And so it's kind of it can feel contrast or like an oxymoron in a way. But I think the key is to be grateful and to continue to experience things in purpose, in alignment with values, so that you don't just want things to want things, but that there's a meaning behind the things, that there's intentionality, and that intentionality comes control, comes humility, comes integrity, comes mindfulness, right? As opposed to just sporadically just going out there and going crazy. And so he was talking about a friend of his that lived in Minnesota, and she is a declutter person on the internet and Instagram, and she had introduced him to this concept called Fumiyu. I'm going to butcher this, but I'm going to do my best. Fumiyu Sasaki, which means that every single material item in your home is sending out a message of something to do. And this message gets added to your to-do list without knowing it. For example, the dishes in the sink say, wash me. The laundry on the floor says, pick me up and put me in the wash. The toys on the floor from your kids say, pick me up and put me away. The guitar in the corner says, play me. The books on the shelf say, read me. The clothes in your closet say, wear me, right? Like every material thing that you have in your space at your home is needing something from you. And so if we constantly live in this cluttered environment, it's not clean, it's not organized, everything doesn't have a home, we have many different things that can be used for the same thing, right? We have too much, I guess, in a way, then that can create a psychological heaviness or a crowdedness that automatically takes energy from you. That energy could instead go to your kids. It could go to work. It could go to you thinking about date night for your wife or your husband or your significant other that you have not gone on a date night in the last few months. It could go to reaching out to a friend that you haven't touched base with in a while, right? There's more things that can be, more meaningful things that energy could go to, but instead it's being pulled room by room, depending on how many things and how big your space is, every time you walk through it or are in it. He goes on to say that every purchase costs you a piece of your life. That every time you part with $1, you part with a tiny piece of your freedom. That $4 coffee is 12 minutes of work. You know, that new car that you just bought might be a year's salary. And I think his point of sharing all this is really just to be more intentional with what we purchase. That due to marketing and keeping up with the Joneses and how our culture in America at least is structured, or in the West, it's about we need it, even though we may not, right? And so really asking the hard questions to yourself of like, okay, if I'm going to invest in this, what is it going to be for? Why is it needed? And having those filters that you work through before just hitting the buy now button, which is so easy to do. You open an app, you type in something, and you could buy it in less than 20 seconds, right? And so there's not, unless you've been thinking about it all the way up until, maybe there's not much thought that goes into those purchases, and that's how things can just begin accruing that aren't necessarily needed. Instead, that $100 that you spent this week that now you saved can be put towards a 401k, an IRA. It could go towards your kid's college fund. It can go towards a vacation that you haven't taken in a long time. Just really understanding where your money goes helps you have more freedom. And also gives you more control over your life, right? If I'm having to just send money out because someone tells me that I need it and I buy it, then there's not much control there. But if it's like, well, you may need it, but I don't necessarily need it now, or I don't need it at all, there's autonomy there, there's decision making, there's control. So I think that can be very helpful. All right. So after choosing freedom, there are a few more chapters on. The next one is choosing mindfulness. And his basic call to action here is really just to spend time in silence, which I think is frightening for lots of people. Like I just sit here and do nothing? Yeah, I mean, actually, yes. Doing nothing is actually the hardest something that you can do. Well, how do I do it? You sit there still. You don't move your body. Okay, then what? Then you let your mind roam. Well, what if I start thinking about things I don't want to think about? Observe it. Well, what if I start thinking about things that I can't control? Let it happen, right? 10 minutes of just stillness with you, silence with you. The most important person in the world is you. If you don't have time for you, how are you going to make time for other people? We got to take care of ourselves. And what better way to do that than to develop a more intimate relationship with ourselves? And what better way to have that intimacy with ourselves than to observe us? Observe what we do, what we think, because every thought you have produces a feeling, and every feeling you have quickly creates an action item. So either you're doing something or you're not doing something, but even not doing something is doing something, right? So a thought, a feeling, an action, how will we know our patterns, our tendencies, our fears, our insecurities, our joys, our desires, our dreams, if we don't observe? If we're constantly back to back to back to back to back to back, gotta do this, gotta do that, exhausting. So 10 to 15 minutes can begin to create space for you to think, space for you to identify what you're curious about, what you're excited about. Time to thank yourself, to love yourself, to just realize your programming, your defense mechanisms. You know, how the thing that a person that you haven't thought of in a long time just pops into your head. And then you follow up on that. And that person ends up having a business proposal for you. Or they're like, you know what? You've been on my mind too. And now you go and get coffee. And now that person becomes a great reestablished friend. You know, we never know. I truly believe that there's always divine nudges happening in every moment. And it's our job to listen. But it's hard to listen when we're just caught up. And again, it's not like you necessarily have to create additional time to do this. It's you can drive in silence. You can walk from your office building to your car in silence. Intentional, right? Not just going through on your phone. When you're going to the bathroom, go to the bathroom. We're all guilty. Right? Like go to the bathroom and just let yourself go to the bathroom without having to be on something. When you're eating, eat. Small things first, then build to bigger things. Okay. The next one is health and healing. So in this chapter really just calls awareness to the things that we're putting into our bodies, right? And to keep this is super brief and simple, not a nutritionist, not here to give you nutritional advice. I think there are certain staples that if you follow these, you're generally going to be a lot healthier. I'll give those here. One is JERF. This comes from my good friend, John Kemp. Shout out to you. JERF is just eat real food. Just eat real food. The more you do that, the healthier you're going to be. Second, try and rid yourself of as many seed oils as possible. Olive oil, avocado oil, ideally. Number 3, minimize or eliminate alcohol. It's poison. No amount is good for you. It destroys your sleep, your muscle building. It especially with kids, like it's just not a good, it doesn't work in tandem. Like if you have a few glasses of wine at night, I'm not saying never to drink, but I'm just saying like having a few glasses of wine at night, you go to bed, kid gets up in the middle of the night, you're less irritable, you wake up groggy, you rely too much on caffeine the next day. It's a cycle that doesn't need to happen. All right, that's a whole nother subject. But so I would say that Protein, like being mindful of your protein intake, I think is help, like more. I wasn't getting enough, and I know this kind of relates to more sedentary lives versus active lifestyles, and how that might be affected. But if you're active, like protein, high protein is going to be helpful. And then hydration, just electrolytes, water, basic. Like we don't have to overcomplicate it, right? I do think there's benefit in tracking your food. I think people are terrible at estimating how many calories they eat per day, especially with how calorie dense food is nowadays and how quick it is to get calories and not feel full. So I do think a food journal, not forever, but for like 30 days, can literally change how you eat, maybe for your life, because you'll realize, oh my gosh, one bite of that is actually 150 calories, or one little piece of this is 300 calories with 45 grams of sugar. Oh, that's why I feel the crash. That's why my stomach hurts. That's why I couldn't go to sleep, right? You just start making all these associations when you start documenting, and people don't document. So I would say that would be extremely beneficial. And then lastly, choose belief, right? And in this chapter, it's really just controlling your focus, controlling the controllables, tapping into something bigger than you, purpose, meaning, and not feeling that you have to control everything, right? And so if that means going to church, if that means, having a spiritual practice that you do regularly, having an anchor in our lives that pull us out of our selfish, me first, the life is only about me kind of thought process, and into something bigger. Because with a bigger vision comes bigger capacity. With bigger capacity, we're able to hold more love, hold more pain, hold more uncertainty, and we can begin to trust in that bigger force, and that bigger force can help us not get caught up in things that we don't need to get caught up in, right? Okay. Lastly, all of this I realize is hard work, right? And with anything hard, it requires energy. So there's going to be some decisions that need to be made. And the road to getting better at this is going to be harder before it gets easier, right? And I'm not here to say that what we've talked about here today is a linear thing. It's more so what resonated with you today is probably where you need to start and just get better, 1% better, right? As long as there's some growth each day in that, I think that's a winning strategy. You compound that over 90 days, your life can be completely different, right? So whether you have high levels of anxiety or low levels of anxiety is not always bad. So we don't want to demonize it as much. We just want to say, how am I using it? Or better yet, how is it using me? and depending on those answers are going to dictate where you'll want to be and what may need to be done. And so I hope this episode on anxiety was helpful to you. I hope it added some additional clarity. Again, the book is Building a Non-Anxious Life by Dr. John Delony. Highly recommend. It's a good read. I think you'll at least find 1 to 3 really solid, practical things that you can do daily, weekly, monthly, yearly that can support your mental, emotional, physical health, and help you stay on path to where you want to go and ultimately live on your terms, which is why I'm here. And I assume why you're listening. So thank you for being a part of the family. Thank you for listening. Thank you for hearing my interpretation of the notes and research that I've been doing and the books that I've been reading. I plan to make more episodes like this, so please let me know your thoughts on the structure, the flow. I want to continue to add value to you guys and also learn as I'm sharing too. So have a good day. I'll see you guys next time. Much love. Go out there. Be your own 1%.